Is Denver doomed? Will Denver start seeing more abandoned buildings and boarded up windows? 1,000 businesses have left and nearly 3,000 people have left since 2020. Is that just a hiccup, or is this just the beginning? We'll talk about why residents and businesses have been leaving Denver throughout this video and why it might be a sign of a long road ahead for the Mile High City. I begin the video at a Denver Home Depot. What you can see right away is the amount of migrant workers who are just standing around in the parking lot of Home Depot and they're trying to pick up some under-the-table labor opportunities. I mean, most of them don't have the authorization to work legally in the United States, so they have to try to find these under-the-table labor opportunities, and what better place than a Home Depot, right, where people are coming in and out with building material? Well, apparently some of these migrants will try anything, including trying to make Home Depot customers pay for free parking. Some of these big box stores in Denver will hire security companies to try to stop them from doing that. Anyway, I was looking around on the internet and I came across this. Let's see if you can follow along. When she got out of her car, a woman with a baby stood by her trunk and asked her for money. When she came out of the store, a man followed her to ask her if he could help her load her purchases for money. When she was done loading up her car, a kid ran up and offered to take her cart to the stall for her for money. When she put away her own cart, there were 4 men leaning on the rails asking her if she had any extra change. I mean, my goodness. That's, it's a lot of people asking for some money for just a simple trip to the store, right? Well, that's the reality of what's going on in Denver right now. Meanwhile, I was at this very same intersection, the intersection of Alameda and Santa Fe, a few days before I recorded the footage for this video, but when I was here, I was stopped at a red light, and since this was a live stream, the footage isn't as good as my usual stuff, but you can clearly see that there was a guy trying to put on a show for those of us who were stopped in traffic. Guys walking up and down, trying to holler at people, asking for tips for putting on a circus show at this busy intersection here. So yeah, that was the scene at that intersection a couple of days prior, and this was the scene at this intersection on this particular day of July 5th, 2023. I mean, it wasn't anybody causing any trouble, it's really just sad to see. But yeah, this is the reality of the Denver metro area these days. Anywhere that you park your car, anywhere that you're waiting in traffic at a red light, yeah, you're vulnerable to be bothered or asked for some change by somebody trying to do something. And if you want to cancel me for my choice of words there, that's okay. I'm not going to get canceled, so it's fine. But let me just throw this at you. If you were the one being asked for change every single time that you're stopped at a red light, or every time that you park your car and go inside a store and come back out, or every time that you want to leave your condo, leave your house, apartment, and go for a walk, every single time that you go out in public, you're asked for change 3 or 4 times or more, yeah, that's going to be a nuisance, because if you end up giving everybody some change or some money every time that someone asks for money, well, guess what? You're not going to have any of it. So yeah, it's a bother. But this is all happening because the Denver metro area has seen one of the larger waves of migrant workers come through since 2020, with as many as 28,000 arriving on buses in 2023. That being said, it's no secret that Denver has taken a turn for the worse, and I'm not blaming this on the migrant workers, I'm not blaming this on the homeless people. I'm just saying that overall, Denver has taken a turn for the worse because it's true. There's been an increase in crime. Most of it has been property crimes such as car break-ins and car thefts. There's been a slight increase in the violent crime, but most of it is the property crime. And we'll talk more about the homelessness, the migrants, and the increase in crime throughout this video, but the main point of this video that I want to make is not the migrant workers, it's not the homelessness, it's not the crime. The main point that I want to make and talk about in this video would be the population loss that Denver has started to see. All of this comes after a decade of substantial growth. The population of the Mile High City grew to 715,000 by the 2020 census, but since then, the latest estimates show that only 713,000 people live in the Mile High City. Yeah, that's still a lot of people. I say only as if it's a small amount, but no, that's still a lot of people. But that's a decline of 2,286 people, or only 0.3%. So it's not a huge decline by any means, but when you factor in that Denver grew from 600,000 to 715,000 between 2010 and 2020, or a growth rate of 19.2%? Yeah, things have changed here because the data isn't subjective, people. You can't argue the data. Folks are no longer moving into the Mile High City near to the rate that they were 10 years ago. And additionally, people have been moving out of town. It's a big deal when a city or a region or a state loses population because that means lower tax revenue to fund city services and infrastructure and things of that nature. So it's important to find out the reasons why people are leaving so that you could possibly find a solution to the problem, right? Well, the reasons why people have been leaving Denver, the people who have left the city proper, list homelessness, crime, and cost of living as the main factors for ditching Denver, a town that not long ago was one of the most popular places for young professionals to relocate to. Anyway, those are facts, and what I said was objective, not subjective, people. So, people who have left Denver say that they're leaving because of homelessness, high crime, and cost of living. I never lived in Denver, so this isn't me saying it. It's the people who used to live here that are saying this. The people who used to love Denver but have moved away in recent years are saying that they have left because of homelessness, high crime, and high cost of living. I've also seen people mention those things in the comment sections of my other videos on Denver. Now, we've already talked about homelessness quite a bit and the migrant workers, but some of the other reasons would be the extreme rise in crime in Denver, which is mostly property crime like car break-ins and vandalism. Add in cost of living and nobody wants to be paying above average living expenses to be surrounded by filth on the streets and never knowing if they'll have to schedule an appointment with the auto glass shop the next day, especially when you can pay much less to live in a much safer area like Omaha, Nebraska, for example. Meanwhile, we've been going through the Baker neighborhood of Denver, and we're also going to go through the Lincoln Park neighborhood. This is video number 4, by the way, in my Denver series where I go through the entire city, and I'm going to be uploading a lot of videos on my second channel as a part of this series, so make sure to subscribe to not only this channel, but also my second channel called Chris Harden's Travel Archives and hit the notification bell so that you can be notified whenever I upload a new video within this series. The series will also be listed in numerical order in my Denver playlist linked down below, so you can always check that as well if you're wanting to follow along with this 28 video series. Alright, so now back to it. As of 2024, there isn't too much abandonment in the Baker and Lincoln Park neighborhoods of Denver. There isn't much of it anywhere in the Mile High City, honestly, but if the trend of decline among the city proper continues like I think that it will, then you're going to start seeing more and more of it creep up within the next decade. Now, it's important for the city leaders to watch this video and listen to what I'm saying and try to prove me wrong and solve this problem as soon as possible, because the further you get into an economic downward spiral, the harder it is to get out of it. Just ask the city of Detroit how long it took them to start seeing some positive growth in the downtown area and the surrounding neighborhoods. In the Denver area, there's a large crowd of longtime conservative locals, and they like to blame the California exodus as being part of the reason why there's so many liberal policies that have been put in place here. Businesses and people have been flocking from the Golden State faster than a road-raging idiot on I-25, and they're heading to places like Las Vegas, anywhere in Texas, and, quite honestly, Denver. Denver's been one of the top spots for Californians to relocate to over the last 10 years. There's actually been quite a few companies from Silicon Valley and other parts of the state that have also relocated to Colorado. Now, Texas has been by far and away the most popular destination for California transplants, as the no state tax and overall affordable cost of living down there is attractive. We'll see how long that lasts, but voting changes over the last 20 years in the state of Colorado is the most logical answer as to why not only Denver but the entire state has changed as much as it has over the same time frame. Obviously, another factor would be the extreme rise in overall cost of living, as when there's an increased demand for people to want to live in a certain area, as there has been in the Denver metro area, naturally, home prices are going to rise because that's how it works. So that's a large factor too. But for much of Colorado's history, the state voted Republican up until 2004, and since then, the state has voted for Democrats. And it's true that longtime Coloradans feel as if the new liberal policies that have been put into place are a part of the reason as to why the cost of living has spiked, and also partially to blame for the homeless problem that the Denver metro area sees today. Currently heading south on Broadway, and as you can see, the thoroughfare is full of bars, shops, restaurants, and other entertainment venues. But anyway, there's a couple of notable things to point out on the recent history timeline of Denver, and that would be legalizing pot and the pandemic. We'll start with the pandemic. Obviously, 2020 was a rough year for all of the country's major cities, but that year seemed to do much more than just a temporary dent to the economy for these cities, Denver included. And we're going to focus on Denver, obviously, since that's the city that we're in for this video. Well, for the year 2020, Denver saw the largest single-year economic fallout in the city's history. The city lost $226 million in revenue that year, which was millions of dollars more than what the city forecasted. Denver's chief financial officer that year mentioned how concerned he was for the city to be able to continue to provide services, such as police and fire, at the rate that they wanted to, with the more than expected decline in revenue. That was a drop of 10.5% in overall revenue that year, compared to 6.5% during the financial crisis in 2009, and people thought that 2009 was bad. When it comes to legalizing recreational pot, well, at this point, there's been a lot of states that have done that. However, Colorado and Washington were the first states to do so back in 2012. By the way, both states today share similar problems at a high level with drug usage, homelessness, sellouts on the streets, and a high cost of living. Anyway, regardless of how you feel about marijuana use personally, some Republicans feel like legalizing pot is one of the bigger reasons as to why the Denver metro area grew as much as it did in the 2010 decade, but it also ended up bringing in a new crowd, and not a good crowd at that. It's difficult to measure how many people in a region abuse drugs, but there are a few ways. One of the more common ways to measure this would be to look at how many drug overdose deaths there have been. In Colorado, there's been a consistent rise annually in drug overdose deaths since 2020 at a rate of about 8%. Now, Colorado still isn't in the top 10 nationally for drug overdose deaths, but it's undeniably an issue that's been on the rise in Colorado, let alone the Denver metro area, specifically the city proper. Going back further than the pandemic year, back in 2011 before marijuana was legal, that year, Colorado saw an overdose death rate of 16.1 per 100,000 to seeing nearly double that number in 2021, being as high as 31.4 for every 100,000 residents. You can see with this graph here, though, that it's still below the national average. So maybe that paranoia of legalizing pot being such a huge player in all of this is over-exaggerated. Or maybe it's right on par as more states in this country continue to legalize marijuana slowly but surely, and nationally, the drug overdose death rate continues to rise. We all know that marijuana by itself isn't all that bad, but if you buy it off of the street, it's possible that it's laced with another drug like fentanyl, something that you wouldn't ever be able to tell based off of an eye test, feeling, or smelling. So if you buy pot off of the street, you're gambling. Also, some people feel as if marijuana is a gateway drug to start abusing other, harsher illegal drugs, such as meth and fentanyl. There's some research that backs up that claim, but there's also the same amount of research that would deny that claim. So really, it's hard to say whether marijuana is a gateway drug or not. Whatever it is, I think that we can all agree that the real issue is with abusing other drugs such as crack, or if you're an old rich white guy, cocaine, or maybe it's meth, fentanyl, or another drug. Yeah, and in Colorado, that problem is seen within the city limits of Denver at a higher rate than it is anywhere else in the state. And since this video is about the decline of Denver, that's a large contributor as to why people are leaving. Because with the increase of people who are high or strung out on something, there's been an increase in property crime and other forms of, vandalism or even violent crime. And I know that saying facts these days can cancel someone like me, or it can make people mad, but the facts state that there's a large portion of the homeless community in Denver that abuses illegal drugs. So drug usage, homelessness, crime, all of that plays into the problem that Denver has been seeing with the decline in businesses and residents. And if the city can't turn it around, then the city will continue to lose people and businesses. So for the people who are leaving Denver, where are they going? Well, a lot of them are going to the suburbs. They're staying within the Denver metro area, but they're just moving outside of the city. where there's less crime and fewer tent cities in most of them. Some of the suburbs around here see high rates of crime, just like the city of Denver does, and they also see high rates of homelessness. But despite the city of Denver alone losing a couple thousand people since 2020, the Denver metro area has continued to grow, granted at a much slower rate than the prior decade. Some folks are moving to Colorado Springs, where the overall cost of housing is lower. As for the people who are moving out of state entirely, well, the data shows that the top destination is Texas, followed by Florida and California. So at least it seems as if some of the California transplants are moving back to where they came from. So I've talked a lot about the homelessness, and I've talked a lot about the drugs and the opioid crisis that plagues this city, but now I'm going to talk about some of the crime that has risen in the Mile High City. Despite the rise in murders, assaults, and other forms of terrible violent crime, the one stat that gets talked about the most in Denver is the rise in vehicle thefts. Currently, there are 3 Colorado metro areas that are in the top 10 for auto thefts. Pueblo leads the country, while Denver is in 3rd place, and Greeley is in 10th place. When it comes to states, Colorado is in 5th place for carjackings. That first list, by the way, was for metro areas in the country, so the entire 2.9 million populated area that includes places like Thornton, Lakewood, and Aurora. Yeah, the entire Denver metro area is in 3rd place in the country for carjackings. This list shows that the city of Denver is the 2nd worst in the country for auto thefts. So just the city proper, the city of Denver, home to 713,000 people. And of course, that's followed by Pueblo, so this is a major issue in the state of Colorado right now. You know, auto glass shops around here must be doing really well these days, I'd imagine. The rate of auto thefts in Denver increased by 37% over the last year. Different publications will show you different results, just like they will for every list of this type, but pretty much every credible list out there on the top 10 cities for auto thefts will have Denver in the top 5. And when you look up that list for states, they'll have Colorado in there, because things really have gotten to be that bad here, unfortunately so. Some lists have the Denver metro area as the top metro area in the country for car thefts, and the state of Colorado as the worst state in that category. Well, now for some info on the neighborhood that we've been driving around, which is the Baker neighborhood. The neighborhood today is home to 6,800 people. The median household income is $96,000 per year, so that's not bad, but it kind of is when you factor in the median value of owner-occupied housing units, right? Yeah, $436,000 per place of residence. That's a pretty high number. That would be tough for most people to be able to afford. Lastly, the poverty rate is pretty high at 16.3%, or at least higher than you would expect for a neighborhood with a median household income of $96,000 per year. On to the crime rates now, as Baker sees a violent crime rate that's nearly triple the national average, but it's safer than your typical Denver neighborhood in that matter, at least. Same story with the property crime rate, in which, you guessed it, auto thefts are the most common crime in this part of town. So if you plan on living here, maybe hold off on buying that new Kia and maybe save up for a slightly fancier electric vehicle, since those types of cars get stolen much less. Soon we'll be in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, really soon, so I'll go ahead and share some stats for that one too. Just under 4,000 people call Lincoln Park in Denver home, and the median household income is $62,000 per year. Not near enough to support the median home value of $448,000. 45% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and the poverty rate is 21.1%. And after seeing those numbers, you can imagine that the crime rate is slightly higher in Lincoln Park than it is in good old Baker. All in all, the biggest difference between the two neighborhoods would be the median household income, as everything else is pretty much the same. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the history with Denver's Lincoln Park neighborhood. There wasn't too much to say about Baker, to be quite honest with you, but there are a few more noteworthy things to talk about with Lincoln Park. Lincoln Park is a neighborhood with strong Spanish roots, and sometimes it's referred to as La Alma Lincoln Park. Yeah, my Spanish accent there isn't up to date, so you're going to have to get over that one. I'm from the Midwest, people. All right, so in 2021, the Denver City Council designated the La Alma Lincoln Park Historical Cultural District, which recognizes the historic cultural Chicano movement for the city. The Lincoln Park neighborhood consists of many homes that were built before 1890, which is rare for Denver because with Denver being out west, the city was built later than cities out east were in this country. Anyway, the Lincoln Park neighborhood was also the main neighborhood in the Mile High City for Chicanos to settle down in. Since 2017 or so, there has been a strong effort through both neighborhood leaders and the city to preserve the older buildings and not allow them to be torn down for newer high-rises to keep up with the housing demand of last decade. So that's pretty neat. And some people might not think much of that today, but down the road, when all of these buildings are still intact, this neighborhood could very well add a nice historical charm to the central part of Denver. Another cool looking thing to check out in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, which I failed to do while I was here, would be the Buckhorn Exchange, which brands itself as Denver's original steakhouse. The restaurant was established in 1893, and it's been in operation ever since, making it the oldest eating and drinking establishment in Denver. So if you want to be cool, unlike me, as I missed out on this place when I was here, if you want to check this place out, this restaurant is at the corner of Osage and West 10th Avenue if you're looking for a really cool place with unique vibes to check out. And I'm being serious when I say this. I'm actually disappointed that I didn't at least drive past it to get some good camera shots of it. I'm actually quite disappointed. So yeah, next time I'm around, maybe I'll go check out this restaurant. Really does look like a really cool stinking place to go check out, for sure. Well, anyway, as we go along, you can see some of the older, smaller homes that make up the Lincoln Park neighborhood. Some of them were once again built before 1890, but it also appears that there's been some abandonment creeping in over the past couple of years throughout this neighborhood. You also see some newer residential buildings that seem to be developed over the past decade or so, and these are residential properties that some would refer to as gentrification, but gentrification is a big talking point in Denver because of the high cost of living. Really, it's a big talking point among all major cities because I don't know if you forgot, but from 2010 to 2020, the demand to live in major cities in the downtown area and in the neighborhoods that surround the downtown areas just absolutely skyrocketed among young professionals, pretty much my age group. And since 2020, that trend has reversed. People are now looking to move out towards the suburbs once again in a lot of these major cities that have seen a pretty big spike in crime, and Denver absolutely has, like we've talked about. But anyway, when a city like Denver sees such a high demand for people wanting to move in, like this city saw a decade ago, naturally, home prices are going to increase, and that's what happened here. Unfortunately, homes can't be built up to modern codes affordably. Homes are getting more and more expensive to build, material is getting more and more expensive, and, it's getting more costly. So naturally, that's going to jack up the price of housing, whether it's renting an apartment, buying a small condo, or buying a home. And unfortunately, not only Denver, but the entire country has seen home prices soar through the stratosphere over the last 10 years. And despite the recent struggles with the economy since 2020, the home prices have only creeped down just a little bit. So in these larger cities that have been popular places for people to want to move to, yeah, there isn't much that can be done about the housing costs. So you might want to move to an entirely different area if you want to live somewhere that's affordable, because Denver has been a really popular place for people to want to relocate to until recently. Well, I'll rejoin you guys at the 3206 minute mark. That is 3206, where I'll give both the Baker and Lincoln Park neighborhoods a Chris Livability score, and I'll wrap things up for this video. But until then, enjoy the elevator music and enjoy seeing the rest of what I was able to capture of Denver's Lincoln Park neighborhood. There's a few things that I'll point out here and there, but otherwise, I'll talk to you at the Chris Livability score at 3206. This is Denver West High School, home of the Cowboys, with the mascot paying tribute to the old Wild Wild West historic theme that Denver has. The school sees an enrollment of around 770, and it has the largest percentage of minorities out of all of the Denver schools, with 96% of the student body being a minority. Hispanic is by far and away the majority demographic, with 86% of the students being as such. African American makes up 8%, while white makes up 4%. Well, people, it is now that time. You can't always trust the government to put in the best policies, and afterwards you can't always trust their apologies, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. Education is first, and West High School, which we just passed by not too long ago, is one of the worst performing high schools in not only Denver but in the state of Colorado. The Lincoln Park neighborhood is served by West High School, which sees way below average scores in math, reading, and science. The Baker neighborhood, however, is served by South High School, which sees much better results all across the board. South High School is more so a middle-of-the-road school in terms of overall performance, whereas West High School just isn't a good school at all. 7 out of 20 for stinkin' Lincoln, 12 out of 20 for good old Baker. Crime is pretty much bad in both neighborhoods, slightly worse in Lincoln Park than in Baker, so 6 out of 20 for Baker and 4 out of 20 for Lincoln Park. The economy is pretty much the same for both neighborhoods, obviously, as they both have access to the region's high-paying jobs that are still in downtown, 15 out of 20 for both. Recreational opportunities are plenty in the mountains to the west, so 13 out of 20 for both there. Now, history is not really all that strongly present in the Baker neighborhood. Baker was once called South Broadway. That was until the 1970s when the name changed to Baker after a local junior high school. Lincoln Park has more history, as it's an older neighborhood and it has a strong Spanish cultural history at that. 10 out of 20 for Baker, 13 out of 20 for Lincoln Park. When it comes to amenities, Baker has better access to them than Lincoln Park does. South Broadway has plenty of cool things to check out, whereas Lincoln Park doesn't have as many within the neighborhood boundaries, but it is right next to downtown and Civic Center, so 17 out of 20 for Lincoln Park, 18 out of 20 for Baker. The last category is cost of living, and while both Baker and Lincoln Park have home prices that are pretty much equivalent, what's not equivalent is the median household income for both neighborhoods. When you adjust for that, Lincoln Park has it worse. So 4 out of 20 for cost of living in Baker and 2 out of 20 for cost of living in Lincoln Park. All in all, the Chris livability score for both neighborhoods would be 78 out of 140 for Baker and 71 out of 140 for Lincoln Park, putting them both at the bottom of the list out of all of the Denver neighborhoods that I've done this for so far. Final thoughts here, as to be quite honest with you, when it comes to choosing a place to live or whatever, I wasn't really impressed with either Baker or Lincoln Park. Nothing within the two neighborhoods justified the $450,000 or so median value of owner-occupied housing units. I thought that South Broadway had potential to be pretty cool as a spot to hang out at and go grab a bite to eat or grab a drink. And I thought that the Buckhorn Exchange was a really cool place to check out if I am able to come back into the area. But outside of that, there was nothing that really impressed me about the two neighborhoods. Really, to me, it's just sad how big of a problem homelessness has become and how present it is throughout the central parts of the city. It's also sad how the crime rates have risen to the rate that they're at, because really, whenever you're in Denver, whether you're visiting or whether you live in Denver, it's impossible to not have the paranoia of wondering whether or not your car has been smashed into. Well, with that said, I do end the video here, right where we began, at the Home Depot. Do me a favor, as if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, as doing all of those things helps these videos destroy the evil monster that is the YouTube algorithm. Also, make sure to hit that notification bell so that you can be notified every time that I upload a new video. Last but not least, if you can't get enough of me on here, you can always go follow me on my other social media accounts, and those links are below. We'll see you next time. Peace.